Dear friends, we're ready to start. So today we are very welcome. We're very happy to welcome the CEO and founder of the innovation project of SETD. But firstly, let me please introduce the project itself. It's Russian Innovation Night today. And during the year, we've been talking a lot about Russian companies who are changing the world actually. So today we are very welcome. Who are very happy to welcome the CEO and founder of the innovation project of SETD. But firstly, let me please introduce the project itself. It's Russian Innovation Night today, and during the year we will. And we will actually listen a lot about how Russian innovations they changing the perspectives, they're changing the world where we are now, and also what opportunities do we have. So let me please give a floor to Alexander Lazarenko, who will present the company and who will actually let us know what's on the future in the future. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for introduction. It's my pleasure to be here with you this evening. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. So, I will be happy to speak with you about this encouraging topic as environmental footprint management and reduction. And I kindly ask the organizers to let me share my screen. I think you have to stop screen sharing yourself, so it will allow me to share. Thank you. I think now we're all set up. And yeah, let's talk today about green economy. So I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Alex, and I'm founder and CEO of the company of SETD. By education, I'm a software engineer, ecologist, and psychologist. My previous experience, I've spent my whole life working in IT sector. It was cybersecurity, telecom companies, IT consulting, and so on. I was responsible for the development of new product and data analytics, so have quite a good experience in this field. My interests are I like to travel, play billiard, and of course, I'm passionate about what I'm doing. So it's information technologies and sustainable development. And in Offset, we're trying to digitalize this industry. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions during the talk. I will be happy to answer. Feel free to interact me if you can. And yeah, so let's talk about it. Timeline for today's presentation is going to be the following. So we will talk about sustainable development and about the business, about sustainable business. We will talk a bit about sustainable development goals and how we can measure it. Then we will talk about consumer perspective on this topic, about how people really think and how they perceive green brands. Then we will go to carbon footprint management and compensation and talk about carbon neutrality. Let's begin our journey with sustainable development, which is one of the core concepts of every aspect of green economy. And I think the majority of you are familiar with this concept, which is reliant on three basic components. The first one is environmental protection. So we have to do business in environment and not to cause it a lot of harm. We have to be socially responsible for the people who are working in our company, and we have to foster the economic development, not forgetting about the business. And there is a very good quote by François-Henri Pinault, who is saying that companies investing in sustainability today will dominate the future simply because they understand it. So it's partially true even today, because there are a lot of companies who are doing this ESG reporting stuff, and you can see a lot of public companies, Fortune top 500 companies, who are spending a lot of money on ESG reporting. So they're doing different environmental and social initiatives in order to maintain their high positions in the ratings. Some people say that this is heavily affecting their market share, and a lot of investors require companies to have very good ESG reports. However, recent research, which was published by a major financial institution, is telling us that there is no correlation between ESG reporting and companies' market share growth. However, I think that in long term, of course, it will cause different effects because these companies are much better for their employees and they have higher rates related to internal business metrics. So let's talk about sustainable business. This green economy is basically built on sustainable businesses. And sustainable business is a business which can operate under these circumstances. So it should cause minimal effect on environment and bring a lot of benefit to global community, global society, and so on. So we have a couple of points which sustainable companies should do. So they're trying to incorporate principles of these sustainable development strategies into their daily operations and business decisions. They have different committees which are trying to maintain a very good level of sustainable development progress in the company, and they're shifting to decision-making processes which take into consideration sustainability factors. They want to produce environmentally friendly products or services and replace unfriendly ones. This is a very important issue, and it helps to generate a new market of carbon neutral contracts and so on. These companies are typically greener than the rest of competitors, so they're trying to use renewable energy sources. They're trying to reduce their ecological footprint. They're doing a lot of different investment into the field in order to create a very good environment around their business and to help the nature around. And they're trying to also implement these principles in commercial activities to boost their marketing and sales. And of course, last but not least, ESG reporting, which is crucially important here. Sometimes ESG is a part of CSR, which is corporate social responsibility, sometimes not. So it depends business by business, but this ESG is covered in 3 basic topics. And let's talk about sustainable development goals. So we have this political document which tells us that we have to go towards implementation of 17 sustainable development goals, and business which is sustainable, they should implement these goals. So businesses, depending on the area where they operate, depending on the domain, they're trying to implement the sustainable development goals. The question which arises here is how we can measure the progress towards implementation of sustainable development goal. Because zero hunger, like it's quite an obvious thing, no poverty as well, but climate action. For each and every sustainable development goal, there is a set of science-based indicators which help us to track progress uh, towards the implementation of a particular goal. They have a special document which is quite big, where you can find a specific formula which you can use to track the progress towards the implementation of a particular goal. So some businesses started to implement the digitalization strategy, and they started to implement different metrics in order to show their customers and show their stakeholders that they're implementing these goals. We at the company, we are focusing more on goals which cover environment, but of course we can have an effect on social goals as well, because we help to generate additional revenue streams to social communities. And if we are speaking about the climate action, the basic target here is the reduction of carbon footprint, which is one of the main issues here, and is one of the factors which affects the global warming. With global warming, currently on the planet, there is a very interesting situation, because in some parts of the world, educated people thinking that climate crisis is just a fiction, so no crisis exists and they don't really care about it. This is typically very common situation in countries where the society is hierarchical and the decision-making process is hierarchical. So in this societies, educated people think the climate crisis is fiction. Instead, in the developed countries where the hierarchical structure doesn't correlate with the rest of the world, where you have more egalitarian approach about how you're doing things and how you're making decisions, educated people think that it's a very important issue. Currently, these countries have much more GDP and much more money to invest, so these countries are driving these innovations. But as we can see, the carbon footprint is quite big and it grows year by year. So if we won't stop it, we will have high temperature on the ground, and it will cause a lot of different side effects. Carbon emissions are a very interesting topic, because some skeptics, they say that even though we have very big carbon emissions, you have a very big carbon emissions number, but also you have more trees on the planet. So the planet is actually becoming greener. And this does make a lot of sense, because as we all know, plants, they consume CO2 as a nutrition. And the more food you have, the more the more trees you have. This is basically a very good point. But of course, this is one of the factors which slightly affect the ecology. And the business, when they're trying to handle the ecological strategies, they're doing 5 different points on which they focus their business development opportunity. So the first one is innovation and technology. So businesses are trying to use new technologies, new innovations in order to reduce the amount of different waste and emissions which they cause by implementation of different sustainable development practices which are coming from technology. Another point is collaboration. So they're trying to create different networks of partners which could exchange knowledge, which could exchange experience and innovation, and then help to share these common resources in order to have something good for environment. The next step is process improvement. A lot of companies are trying to reduce emissions, reduce waste through the reduction of anything which you can reduce related to ecology in their business processes. And then they communicate in these corporate sustainability plans to the rest of employees in order to create a good structure and good mindset within the company to boost their employees to cover this aspect. The next step is greening supply chains. A lot of companies are really trying to green the supply chains. They're searching for partners who are green. They're searching for carbon neutral contracts. They're trying to assess the sustainability of a company. They're looking for suppliers which have very good and sustainable sources. By sustainable source, we are speaking about the supplier who is doing business under a sustainable development strategy, and they're searching for such companies. So typically they're trying to break down their supply chain on different components and use these components to uh, find a greener approach of how they're doing it. And the last is sustainability reporting. Of course, if you are doing all of this, you invest a lot of money into CapEx, into OpEx, and you have to report this goal implementation in order to show the market that you're really good and that you can incorporate everything in a corporate mission. Because without reporting, as we all understand, this is almost useless for business, because if nobody knows about it, how you can gain any profit or revenue out of that besides environmental impact, which is also very good. Nice example is Deutsche Bank, which is publishing their ESG goals based on sustainable development indicators. And you can check out this report on their website, and you can see that they set out these goals that by 2025 they will reduce total energy consumption, that they will use renewable energy, that they will maintain carbon neutrality. They show you the results which they obtained during the 2020. And at a glance, we can find 4 different topics of what they're doing. They invest into sustainable projects like reforestation, like green energy projects. They publish their carbon footprint information, so this should be disclosed, and it's very important. We will talk about it a bit later. They're trying to reduce the usage of natural resources, and they are offsetting their carbon footprint. This is briefly the list of initiatives which Deutsche Bank is doing. Of course, this is not the complete list of what they do, but at a glance, you can get the idea of what they're trying to do. With Russian companies, there are a lot of activities as well. There is example of a company called Polymetal, which is one of the leaders on metal and mining company. They have different sustainable development goals which they implement. They have different programs, and this is an example of how they help to support local communities. So you can see the pictures of youngsters who they support. Gazprom is doing the same thing, so they have this information that they have helped to local communities on the north of Russia in Yamal-Nenetsky district, and you can see the photos of people who they help to maintain good living conditions, maintain salaries, and so on. So different companies implement different activities, but the majority of companies nowadays, as we can see, they're trying to implement the social component because for whatever the reason, they think that it's more beneficial for their business. I used to speak with a lot of guys in this industry who are trying to do the ESG reporting, and typically they go into social stuff because some of them they were promoted to the directors of sustainable development position because they were doing social projects within the company, and it does make a lot of sense. So they start from social thing and move to the ecology. But if we are speaking about the ecological component, there are some environmental challenges which every company faced over the way of becoming zero waste. What we can see from our customers, we're working currently with fashion and apparel industry, and a lot of customers, they require these companies to become zero waste. By zero waste, they mean that they have to reduce the waste, the amount of waste, the amount of textile, amount of water, etc., etc., etc. And people are really putting these lines, dropping lines on Instagram, dropping lines on their website, that the brand should become greener and greener and greener, because they can see different articles in the internet, like a quote which we have on the right slide, on the right part of the slide, that every year 4% of the world's water supply goes to the production of clothing, which is consuming, so one pair of jeans is consuming 7,000 liters of water, which is pretty a lot. 7,000 liters of water, it's really a lot of water. And people are reading this and they want this brand to become zero waste. Same thing happens with meal delivery companies. A lot of meal delivery companies, they have this issue with plastics. I think that the majority of our listeners have once in a lifetime order something from a meal delivery company, and you receive a lot of the small plastic packages where all your food is packed. You have different package for sauce, you have different package for salad, and so on and so forth. A lot of consumers are very unhappy about this. But the interesting thing that they don't want to pay. They don't want to pay when the company asks them if they want to pay for the company to take this away. However, in Russia, there are a lot of people who are paying to a company which is called Green Taxi, and they have a very interesting concept. So you have to keep all your garbage sorted and clean at house. And once in a month, you order this taxi, which costs something like 1,500 rubles, which is 20 or 25 euro, depending on the location where you're situated. And this taxi comes and takes all your garbage away and put it to a recycling facility. And this is a huge problem because it is almost impossible for the company to become 100% zero waste because of different reasons. The first reason is that you can't control every emission which you have. You can't control every emission factor because you can't control your supply chain. This is obvious. Even if companies remove all the plastics from office, they still have carbon footprints, they still consume paper and so on, and there is no substitution for plastics. A lot of companies in milk delivery try to find solution to reduce the amount of plastics which they use. I have heard that some companies have already invested some money into companies which produce biodegradable plastics, but with plastics there is no solution in Russia because it's economically unfeasible to take this plastics away, because you have a price for one delivery in Moscow, which is about 300 rubles, and this costs quite a lot. If you deliver once, you have to collect it back, and nobody wants to keep their garbage at home to keep their plastics and clean it, because people are lazy and they don't really care about it. They want to just throw it away, and it does make sense because they're paying for it. So companies can't do this. And there comes the second problem. There is no good tool to engage the audience into these brand environmental initiatives because they don't want to pay. They just want to tell to the brand that you are unfriendly, you are not green, please become green, and I don't want to do anything. Just do everything for me. I don't want to feel myself guilty, to care about environment. I want to care about environment, but I don't want to do anything about it. That's a problem. And the last problem is that you can't really measure ROI from ecological initiative. When businesses are thinking about these projects, in what activity to invest, they can't measure ROI because there is no clear way of how you can use this initiative to gain revenue, to gain more profit, to gain more customer loyalty. This is a problem because a lot of people, they don't want to spend money on something which won't get back, even if it's about impact and about environment. Business is business. They should maintain the third component of governance about business, because if they're not doing business, they will lose all the other components. Those are the problems, and we have recently found the research which proved our assumptions. So a lot of companies have same problems, and this is the core reason why they are not doing any environmental initiatives, which are coming like which are more sophisticated and more complex than just planting a couple of trees per year from each purchase. However, smart implementation of sustainable development goals positively influences the choice of buyers, and there is good research about consumer perspective. As you can see from the slide, there is a significant growth of responsible consumers in Russia. A lot of people thought that in Russia nobody cares about sustainability, which is not true. a lot of people here really cares about sustainability. This topic for Europe is quite obvious. So a lot of consumers in Europe really care about it. They check this eco labels on production side. They check what is the consumption of different components. Here, people started to think about it as Europeans. So by Nielsen's research, 60%, 67% of Russian consumers are potentially willing to overpay for goods if their manufacturer is sustainable, which is a good factor for this market because companies that get really good incentive to create a green product, to create sustainable product, to sell it more expensive, which is good for environment and good for society. 62% of Russians are ready to change consumer behavior if this will reduce the harm to the environment. This is a very interesting quote. I don't personally see that a lot of people started to care about it, but I hope that this research provides a very good numbers. Moscow School of Management Skolkovo is less optimistic about it, and it tells that 37% of Russians are highly likely to choose goods and services of responsible manufacturers at comparable cost. This is true. I think that this number is much higher in reality because when people see two different avocados, one is eco, one is not eco, they purchase eco one, even if they don't understand what it is all about. And the problem on this market is that there are a lot of different words, like you have sustainable clothing, you have modest fashion, you have slow fashion, and the same happens with food, for example. You have eco food, you have sustainable food, you have different kind of food which have different labels, and nobody really understands the difference between that. So some of the foods were produced using green energy sources, some of food were produced with sustainable supply chain, some is just produced from vegetables from a farm, and nobody really understands the difference. This is another problem with which market have to deal. But the good thing is that 2 out of 3 consumers will stop or reduce spending on brands that mistreat employers or suppliers. So people really don't like this in the majority of countries, so they just stop buying products from a brand which is not dealing good with their employees. It helps to create more sustainable way of how they treat their employees, which is very good. For example, we had a customer who asked us to check their production facility in Spain, where they wanted to understand what are those ESG components of that facility. And when we checked that, we understood that they have quite good social policies, they are very good for environment, and the client was very happy. And this market is growing because the demand for these checks is growing and growing and growing. But the trend in marketing that consumer behavior changes, it's a very good trend for this industry because it helps to boost the health which we can cost our planet. With Western millennials, the situation is very, very good and promising. I would say that in Russia, especially in Moscow, this trend is almost quite like this, not 9 out of 10, but 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 10. They really care about what to purchase, and they want to check sustainable development chains, they want to care about the environment, and they are willing to pay more. So here we have a lot of guys, a lot of people of my age, they really want to purchase ecological, eco-friendly stuff. They go into these shops where you have eco labels, eco everything, you have biodegradable packaging, and so on and so forth, and they really care. So all the companies who are trying to target this audience of Western millennials and millennials in different countries who have the same social profile, they can really get more revenue out of that because these consumers are ready to purchase sustainable production with any kind of labeling which you have. If you can prove that your supply chain is sustainable, you can sell to these people because they really care about it. And we're coming to the next step, which is about carbon footprint and its compensation or offsetting mechanics, which is one of the main components of this green economy. So almost like 90% of different companies, startups, and government, they care about carbon footprint, especially now. So European Union is issuing new regulation, Russia is issuing new regulation regarding the carbon footprint. And this is the basic stuff which comes from old days, and we have the main document which helps this industry to bloom and flourish, which is a Paris Agreement, where the key thought is that if we will keep growing the global average temperature below 2 degrees per Celsius, and we should make an effort to limit this temperature rise to 1.5. And the major component here is carbon footprint, which is basically an aggregate of all greenhouse gas emissions produced directly or indirectly by an individual organization or an event. And everybody are trying to lower this number. And if you will take a look at this, you have three different scopes of how you can measure carbon footprint. Carbon footprint is a very complicated thing. A lot of companies, a lot of different authorities, they're trying to publish a standard of how you can calculate carbon footprint. Almost every industry have their own standard about how they calculate carbon footprint. In Russia, there is a special document which is like ESO, but which is GOST, where they have this methodics of how you can calculate carbon footprint. But the majority of companies on international markets, they calculate carbon footprint based on GHG Protocol, which is Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And this protocol states that you have three different scopes of emission. The first scope of emissions is coming from company-owned facilities. So if you're a reporting company and you physically own company vehicles and you physically own facilities, you have to measure the direct emissions of these facilities, and this will be your scope 1. Scope 2 will be everything which you purchase, like purchase electricity, steam, heating, and cooling. And this is going to be your scope 3, scope 2. And scope 3 will be the rest of your supply chain. You have upstream activities and you have downstream activities, which is related to the product life cycle of your product which you sell or produce. And you have to care about leased assets, employee commuting, processing of sold goods, use of sold products. So basically, you can get the idea that there is a lot of points in carbon footprint measurement, a lot of tons of CO2 equivalent if you measure this scope 3 fully covered for your company, because supply chains, they have lots and lots and lots and lots of components which you should measure in the same way. So let's try to measure a basic example. So imagine that you have an office where you have 2 employees. So you just try to assess your office and calculate your direct emissions from this facility. Then you take your numbers related to electricity, steam, and production of heating. And then you have to, for example, calculate something from scope 3. And you decided to take employee commuting to work. So you have to calculate the carbon footprint of a car. You take this carbon footprint of a car, you measure how much of emissions you can get from that car, and you add this number to your balance sheet regarding to carbon emissions calculation. And you're doing the rest of the stuff with franchises, with your investments, with end-of-life treatment of sold products, and so on. Calculating scope 3 is a very, very sophisticated issue, and a lot of companies, they have problem with this. So typical way of how companies solving this problem of assessment of their carbon footprint, they go into top 4, top 5 consulting company, and they tell them to calculate these numbers. They have their own methodics, they use Excel spreadsheets, and then they spend a lot of time and effort in order to calculate these numbers, which is pretty an issue, because even data collection at this stage is quite a challenge, because companies, they don't even know how much their employees spend time in different transport when they commute into work. And this is a very big problem, because this happens all the time with the majority of data sources which you need to calculate this. Carbon footprint is measured in tons of CO2 equivalent. So you just take this conversion formula, and you take different greenhouses, multiply this to conversion factor, and you get your CO2 equivalent tons. So basically, to measure the carbon footprint, you have to take something from scope, like organization operations. Let's say that it's going to be electricity. You find operation emission factor, which is here on the slide for electricity. You multiply both numbers, and you get total emissions for current activity. And you are doing the same for every component of carbon footprint which your company has. You're doing this for electricity, for commuting, and the rest. This is briefly an idea of how the carbon footprint is measured. Let's consider the example of Deutsche Bank, which has published the emissions about their offices, and you can see the progression of how they reduce their carbon footprint. You can see the variance from previous year, and you can see what they consider when they calculate these scopes. So this information is publicly disclosed, which is pretty good, and they show everybody that they are really doing something towards reduction of carbon footprint. However, if we are speaking about carbon footprint, we have in the hierarchy of how we can measure this carbon footprint. This is based on GHG Protocol. And this is a place for different technologies, for different innovations which come into the market. The first step is that you can avoid something which causes emissions. So let's say that you have an eco-unfriendly way of how you commute to work. You have a car and you have a bicycle. You have to choose bicycle because it produces less carbon footprint than a car. You're avoiding some emission, or you're doing reduction when you're trying to reduce the usage of resource, which emits a lot of carbon footprint. You can substitute some sources which generate a lot of carbon footprint. You can sequester this when you are implementing some kind of innovation technology which just consumes the CO2 and produces something. There are a lot of different tools on the market which are available, which you can use on your production facility in order to boost this activity and to sequester carbon. And you can do diamonds out of those, for example. There is a company which is doing so. And the last step on this journey is offsetting mechanism. So you can just compensate everything that could not be managed on the previous ways. And this hierarchy should be maintained by the company, because if the company skips everything and goes strictly to offsetting, because physically it's the easiest option to do, it's not good on the market, so people don't like it. And the company should do something from this list in hierarchy in order to reduce their ecological footprint and carbon footprint. The algorithm of how you're implementing the carbon footprint reduction project is as follows. The first step, which everybody do, they calculate the company's baseline footprint, which they have in a certain year. Then they get senior management commitment. They select the type of target. They choose period. They choose the different options of how they can reduce this environmental footprint. They set different targets, and then they assess the progress and communicate it, as we can see in example of Deutsche Bank. And the last component here is compensation, because with the rest of the from the hierarchy, everything is quite understandable. So you can implement technology, drop some activity which generates a lot of carbon footprint, but compensation and offsetting, which is called offsetting on the market, is a very interesting thing. It is like energy conservation law from physics, where you can emit something in one part of the world, and you can compensate this in a different part of the world by planting trees or something. So you're basically investing some money in order to offset these emissions elsewhere, because this mechanism is quite efficient, and a lot of companies are choosing this offsetting mechanics in order to reduce their environmental footprint. And sometimes it's much more beneficial from environmental standpoint and from economical standpoint, because $1 invested into offsetting could bring more CO2 consumption than you can invest into a company to change somehow your business process. And this is very interesting. This mechanism started to work in the world with carbon footprint, but currently we can see the companies for doing the same thing with plastics. So you can purchase plastics credits, and somebody will take the certain amount of plastics for which you've paid in a different region of the world, and they will just take it out from the environment. We are working with a company which is called Green Worms, for example, and they're taking these plastics away from ocean, from Indian suburbs, from Indian beaches, and so on. So they prove that they take out plastics from this environment and recycle it. Same thing applies to textile, to water, and to different kind of activities. Right now, we have a special standard of how we can do carbon credits, carbon offsets, but we don't have any standard for plastics credits, textile credits, electronic credits. This mechanism just started to arise, and it's an emerging market, which is like Wild West in the previous days. And the core component here is the carbon credit, which is basically a certificate or permission which represents your right to emit 1 ton of carbon dioxide or equivalent amount of greenhouse gas emissions to the environment. This business works like this. You have two different ways. Sometimes people differ this term for carbon credits and carbon quotas. Carbon quotas are quotas which are issued by the government for you to spend if you have a production facility. So if you overspend it, you have to purchase additional quotas or pay a loan and pay fine. Sorry. Or you have another mechanism where you can have a sourcing business, for example, a company which is doing reforestation. This company is doing reforestation, and they get this carbon quotas papers, which allows them to sell it in open market. And then companies who are emitting carbon dioxide, they can purchase this carbon quotas and use it to write that they have offset a certain amount of emissions and tell that they've done something good for environment. This is a quite established market, so you can divide this market on two. You have a market of voluntary compensation, voluntary offsetting, and you have a market of mandatory offsetting. The market of mandatory offsetting is something like $200 billion. And the market of voluntary offsetting, it grown 3 times per last 3 years, and it's now 600 something million dollars. By 2050, people expect this market to grow to 200 billion. So it will be quite the same like a mandatory one. And you can see the idea that the volume of carbon credits in the European Union in 2018, it ranged from $7 to $25. And average was $16 per ton. However, right now we have a very good carbon credits, which a lot of companies purchase, and they cost like $50 per 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. This is quite a lot. For example, we have a Russian project which has registered quotas in United Nations registry, and they sell one quota for €2 approximately, which is much less. You have different quotas with different standards. You have a lot of different standards with which you can purchase quotas. So purchasing the right quota is also a complicated issue, which you have to solve if you are playing this game, and they're different in price. There are a lot of quotas which were issued using Kyoto Protocol, and they are less expensive than the ones which are compatible with Paris Agreement. And there are a lot of interesting projects, interesting companies which are sourcing this carbon quotas. For example, this project is called Cow Credits, as I remember. So they help to save environment one cow's time. They produce special nutrition for cows, which helps them to reduce methane emissions from ruminants. And they've managed to generate carbon quotas, so people purchase this nutrition and generate new carbon quotas. Another project, which is pretty typical one for this market, is called One Tree Planted. This is a reforestation company and afforestation company, which is saving trees and replanting new trees. They plant tree, receive certain amount of carbon emissions, which they can sell, and so on. Another project is Plastics Bank, which doing the same thing with plastics. So they just collect everything, every plastic bottle which they can from the ocean, and recycle it and do this upcycling materials and help to clean the ecosystem. This market is also very forced by different big players. For example, in fashion and apparel, almost every company is looking on Farfetch, which is one of the major marketplaces. And if you will take a look at 230 positively Farfetch goals, which is a part of their sustainable development strategy, you can see that they have one goal, which is called positively cleaner. So they want to achieve net zero emissions by reduction of carbon footprint. And if you write through this paper, you can find that they don't want to sell brands which are not circular, which are not implementing the same philosophy, which are not inclusive. So they're forcing the brands which want to sell on this marketplace to become greener and to participate in this green economy by implementation of different actions. For example, Farfetch is offsetting every delivery in European Union, as well as you can see the same mechanics in taxis like Lyft or something in state and in Europe. You can see the example of eco-marketing on the slide. This is a company called Pangaya, and they have this impact plugin where they show to customers that their sweatshirt, which is made from certified organic cotton, helps to cause positive impact on choosing of this product. So fashion and apparel industry is one of the key users of Ecology as marketing component, which is good because they help consumers to understand that ecology is not something really hard to do, that they can participate, and by purchasing this God's organic cotton, they help company to generate additional revenue, and they help planet to save some amount of drinking water, which is also good. And you can see a lot of different options. So for example, they tell us that one product purchased, one tree planted, protected, or restored, which is also a very good initiative. There is a bad thing on the market, which is called greenwashing. So a lot of people are accusing companies in greenwashing. Greenwashing is a concept when the company is telling that they are green, they are environmentally friendly without doing anything. And some people on the market, especially consumers who are eco-activists, they tell that such kind of writing when the company is planting a tree after purchasing one product, it's some kind of greenwashing. I don't think that it's a greenwashing case, because greenwashing is when you're doing nothing and you just tell that you're environmentally friendly. But if you're doing at least something, you're planting one tree, you're planting 100 trees, you're showing people that they can do very good with purchasing of your products, you're doing good for environment, because companies, they should have benefits for investments like this, because such a plugin costs a lot of money to implement. And brands are doing this on purpose because they really care about environment, they care about their sales, and it's very good for everybody. However, some people are just trying to accuse brands in greenwashing, which is a bad thing to do. So we at the business community should support every company which is doing at least something for environment, because if you are planting a tree or if you're protecting an animal somewhere, it's better than doing nothing. So it's good, and it should be boosted by the community. You can see the same examples of how companies speaking about carbon emissions on HSBC Bank. So a lot of banks started to shift to net zero emissions, to carbon neutrality, and you can see a lot of reports of how they're doing this. They have a portfolio of offsetting projects, which I demonstrated before. And so the companies are really starting to invest money into this space. The question arises of how we can achieve carbon neutrality, and technology could help us here. As you can see, the example of Deutsche Bank, they have a net zero emission target by 2050, and they have precisely the list of initiatives which they will invest in and which they will implement. And you can see their offsetting portfolio, which is a list of supported projects on regional split. And you can see from this report that they offset Scope 1 and Scope 2 CO2 emissions and business travel of different people to the offices. They choose a specific carbon quota. So they find green projects which reduce carbon footprint based on gold standards and verified carbon standards. We can get the idea about the projects which they support. And you can see that they invest into sustainable forest management, which helps to save our plants. They invest into wind energy, and then they invest into geothermal energy. And a lot of companies, they disclose this information. So if you have your favorite brand, you basically can find the ESG report if this is a public company, and you can find this information of what they offset of what they offset on their website. You can see this picture from a brand project, if I remember, where you have examples of what you can invest in. So they have a wide portfolio of different sourcing companies. You can invest into community tree planting. You can invest into clean cooking fuel for refugees. So they provide green cooking fuel, and you have less emissions. You have tech-enabled rainforest protection, where some technologies like satellite imagery, drones, monitoring tools are implemented into forests to save them. And you have regenerative agroforestry, where you help them to restore degraded land and then pull CO2 out of the atmosphere using this. For your understanding, the total choice of projects in which you can invest to obtain this CO2 emission quotas is something close to 8,000 different projects. So you can choose almost anything in the world, in every geography which you can find, because a lot of companies started to issue these carbon quotas, carbon credits, and sell this in open market. So every company which is going to green way can at least choose something to work with. So the choice is really big, and this is just up to you of what goals you want to implement and what you want to use. As you can see here, Deutsche Bank has different opportunities and different approaches of how they can maintain this level of reduction year by year. And you can see very interesting topics here that they will go for green energy contracts. They will purchase green energy for their facilities. They will participate in voluntary offsetting campaigns for carbon footprint, and they will purchase renewable electricity. Some of the companies, they've started to think about carbon neutral contracts. So this is basically a contract which helps you to lower your carbon emissions by making your supply chain carbon neutral. Because if your supplier is carbon neutral, this purchase of yourself is carbon neutral if you compensate the rest of the ecological footprint which it might cause. So this is an emerging market which is also implemented by different companies, and they started to acquire some customers. So if you're a business owner and you provide companies with services or products, maybe it's a good thing to consider to move to carbon neutral contracts. You basically have to assess the carbon footprint of your supply chain, of production of a particular product which you sell. Then you have to offset this, and then you can make this a carbon neutral contract and sell it in market with a higher return on investment. You can see an example of what they've done to reduce their ecological footprint. So they're doing the same thing which a lot of companies do. They removed all plastic dishes, packaging, vending machines, reduced the use of paper documents, introduced water-saving technology, refusal, and so on. All these things, they really help the environment, and they really help to reduce the ecological footprint of a particular company. So the amount of different options here slightly varies, and it's pretty limited in what you can do to save the environment in-house. But in one day, you just come to a very optimal solution where you can go and reduce your carbon footprint more and more. But if we're speaking about general carbon neutrality, it's a very hard thing to achieve, but we have a special algorithm of what you can do. The company should calculate scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 of carbon emission. Then they set goals to reduce this carbon footprint, and you determine annual percentage of reduction related to the original calculation. You install different equipment, optimize logistics, and so on. You integrate platform which help you to monitor carbon footprint, or you're trying to assess your production, your facilities manually each year. Then you're offset or purchase credits through different reforestation projects or anything which you choose. And then, not mandatory, but you can go to obtaining the certification, which is PIS 2060, which is internationally recognized carbon neutral standard. And after you're doing all of this stuff, you can state that you're a carbon neutral organization, and then use this to develop your business and to do good for environment. This briefly it about carbon footprint, which is one of the main components of green economy from ecological standpoint, because as I have already told, a lot of companies are trying to implement their strategy towards the carbon neutrality and reduction of carbon footprint. Of course, there are some tools like circular economy approaches for fashion, for example. They are based on reusage and recycling and upcycling of different materials which you have, which does make a lot of economic sense, because it's a process where you can just reuse something for which you have already paid and generate additional revenue out of those, which is also good. But in this talk, we've covered ecological perspective, which relates to carbon footprint. And typically when there is a circular economy model for organization from ecological standpoint, it's also more beneficial than just a regular approach, because with reusage, you can avoid emitting some more of carbon dioxide into the air, which is a pretty good thing to do. And now I want to tell you a little bit about our company, of what we do. We are building a digital platform that allows companies to track and monitor their ecological footprint in real time. We are doing this by implementing software which is integrated with internal software of a company, which helps to monitor emissions based on emission standpoints and data flows which a company has under the hood. And our solution is consisted of two components. The first component is dealing with clients front end, where we have an impact plugin, and we help brands to communicate their eco-friendliness to the rest of their customers. So with this particular case, which I have on the slide, we help customers to understand that they have an opportunity to compensate the ecological footprint of a particular order. So we tell them here that you have an opportunity to save some resources of the planet, and you can replenish them at checkout. On checkout, people just get this compensation button where we calculate the ecological footprint of one particular item. We take into consideration the delivery, the production facility which was used to produce a particular item, and then we calculate the amount of money which people should transfer to projects in order to compensate this ecological footprint. People click on this button, then pay, some money adds on top of the order price, and then we can use this money to transfer it to businesses which help company to reduce their ecological footprint. Under the hood of the business, we install this monitoring platform, which I have already told you about. And this platform helps to track carbon footprint, various fractions of ecological footprint, like solid waste, fabrics, plastics, water usage, and so on. And we calculate this per each SKU which you might have for each production facility, for each business process which you have. So you can get the idea of what it consists and which factors affect your ecological footprint. And currently we are working towards on implementation of science metrics and science-based indicators of sustainable development goals to help brands to generate more value out of those metrics. And the last component of our business model is the network of offsetting partners, which are located all around the world. So we have companies which are handling organic waste. We have companies who are helping to reduce water usage. We have companies which recycle textile, reforest trees, and so on. So we are finding the best set of partners for the company for which we are helping to reduce their ecological footprint, which suits both needs, both marketing need and both environmental need. So we help businesses to cause positive impact and generate additional revenue and customer loyalty through marketing initiatives, because this approach allows company to sell them additional revenue, not taxes, not spending on ecology. And companies love to do this because they can see the results and they can help planet and gain some more revenue out of those. I think that's briefly it regarding to my talk. So I will be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And thank you for being with us this evening. I was happy to share the information.
Alexandra, thank you so much for presenting the project as well as the general concept of the current situation. As we are looking for questions from our audience, we have a couple of them prepared to start with. Ecological approach and then shift to technologies. Do you think that this is the mind that should turn first to bring the development of this industry, or it is really the space for technologies to measure, to assess, and then to give this path to the potential development? Because earlier it was not possible. Earlier technologies were quite limited, and thus we were not actually able to measure the impact. However, now it is possible. So to make this happen, what pillar should be first? Do you have your personal perspective on this?
I do have my personal perspective. So I think that, yes, technology is one of the key drivers here, because without technology, you can't really measure it. So you're absolutely right. I have one example. So we have a customer who is recycling electronics, and they started to recycle it 3 or 4 years ago, just because the technology arrived. And before that, they were unable to do this with economical sense. And technology just boosted this industry, and now they can recycle this electronics and give the second life to components which were thrown away years ago. And technology helps here, and a lot of different technologies arise during the last years. So, for example, we have a lot of garbage sorting facilities and garbage recycling facilities which are using modern technology in order to help and reduce this waste. And this technology really helps, because currently in some cities in the world, you don't have to sort your garbage. You don't have to collect it sorted, because sorting facility is much more efficient than people who are sorting this garbage in the end of supply chain. And this technology will help to reduce carbon footprint significantly, and the rest of the factors of ecological footprint. But business should go for it as well, because if business will find the opportunity in these initiatives, and they will find the way of how they can gain additional revenue out of those, and ecology will become a revenue generating factor, not a cost factor. A lot of companies will start doing this and the planet will become greener. So my personal perspective is that we have to maintain balance between business and technology. The technology should be developed, but business should find a way of how they can gain additional revenue out of ecology. Because if business will understand that this is a very good thing for the company financial standpoint and for environmental standpoint, we will have a better planet.
Thank you so much for elaborating on this. Going further and shifting to the question of the actor who actually shifts the development of this topic, do you think that it would be the audience, the customers, who are demanding for changes, or is it business that is interested in profits that actually the ecological approach really bring? The first one to make it happen.
It's a very complicated question, and I think it depends on the industry. So in some industries, the customer will be the first to ask. In some industries, the business will first to make it. So if you will speak about metal and mining companies, I don't think that the majority of customers 10 years ago required them to become greener, but they had to because government just told them to do so. And a lot of companies are doing this just because they want to do it in different sectors. But in some sectors like fashion, like meal kit delivery, a lot of customers are forcing the decline. I had a couple of conversations with CEOs of leaders of fashion in the apparel market, and it's just their intention to become greener. Nobody from their customers is telling them that they're bad or they're doing bad things. It's just their part of sustainable development strategy, and it is important on personal level for a CEO of a company. So I think that the combination of customers and business will make it happen.
It's a very, very smart reply, I would say. And sometimes it's exactly in different businesses, it works differently. And maybe it would be as my last question, if from the audience, personal endeavors with the project and your long-term vision. How do you envision this industry, and what would you like to achieve in the upcoming future?
We have a goal for the company, so we want to help our customers to reduce their carbon footprint at least by 15%, which could be billions of tons of CO2 equivalent. And from a social standpoint, we want to generate additional revenue streams for people in local communities all around the world. And another thing which I personally want to do, a lot of people with ecology degrees, they don't have a very good workplace, and this profession is slightly underserved. And I want to make it a better thing. I want people to understand that this is a very important profession, and that caring about environment is a very good and beneficial thing to do. So I think that these three components will together help us to build a better company.
Thank you so much. We have a question from the audience. Let me read it aloud. Can you please tell a little bit more about microplastics in textile?
The issue of microplastics is quite complicated because microplastics in general could be found almost everywhere. And with the textile industry, there are a set of problems related to microplastics. The first problem is that even if they recycle it, they could generate additional microplastics. This is related to old-fashioned recycling facilities. Another problem is that even if people purchase something and they just throw it away, it is not biodegradable, and microplastics, which is used for production of these items, could be thrown into environment as well. And the third problem is that on production facilities, a lot of things are made with plastics, which generate a lot of microplastics. So I can't really answer this question in a very scientific way, but the main idea here is that it generates a lot of microplastics. And some of the textiles which are made from from synthetic things, they also generate a lot of microplastics, which sometimes is not recyclable. So we have one of our offsetting partners here in Russia who's recycling textile, and they are not taking some kind of fabrics which has a lot of microplastics inside. So this is a common problem.
And how would it be possible to reduce, or how do you envision this way towards the solution? Is there a solution?
Also a hard question, because as ecologist, I have to say that you have to purchase one bag of linen and you have to wear it on yourself and purchase nothing at all for the rest of your life. So this will be sustainable and ecological. But a lot of people, they want to change their wardrobe quite extensively. And sustainable brands, they have a problem, because when you are a sustainable brand on the market, you can't really issue a new collection and send an advertising that, yeah, I have a new set of clothing and you have to purchase it because it's not in collection. You just purchased your summer, you thought to purchase a new one. We can't tell this because it's not sustainable way. Sustainable way is when you're purchasing one hoodie and you use this hoodie 3 or 5 years at least. And one of the solutions here is the popularization of recycling of clothing, because when companies like our partners are recycling clothes, they give it a second life. Sometimes they resell it on a second-hand market. Sometimes they recycle it and they generate new materials out of those. But generally speaking, the only good solution here is to change the mindset of people, for them to purchase clothing which they will use in long term, instead of using these clothes in short term. And for production facilities, they have to use organic cotton, for example, and produce more reliable clothing, which will last longer. And this approach will help to reduce the consumption of clothing and generate less rubbish out of those. Another kind of solution here is that those guys who are in the end of supply chain of these manufacturers who are producing this cotton, who are producing textiles and different components of clothing, they should become greener and make this in a more environmentally friendly way. And if they will do this, the entire industry will become greener. But the best option here is just to reduce the consumption, which is almost impossible to do. So things like organic cotton, like greening of supply chains and choosing the manufacturers who are eco-friendly could solve this problem a bit.
Thank you so much
Or
for the
technology,
reply.
which we have
Yeah.
discussed. Technology could help to solve this as well. The problem is that people are just throwing away this clothing. So in my apartment, I can see a lot of good clothing which could be reused. It's just thrown away because nobody wants to go to a fundomat and put this clothing in the fundomat in order to just go to recycling facility. And this is a huge problem. People just don't want to go there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As the topic is really broad and we can talk a lot about it, maybe it's best to go and do something, right? So we're really happy to follow your progress, your project as it is. If we don't have other questions for the audience, I would really thank Alexander for joining us today, for sharing his experience and the theoretical background on this topic. And we look forward to the next session that we will announce in our social networks. Alexander, thank you so much one more time. Have a good evening and hope to see you soon.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It was my pleasure to share the presentation. And have a nice evening.
Likewise. Bye.
Bye-bye.